A very good afternoon to all. As a part of the Silver Jubilee celebrations organized by the International School of Photonics QSAT, today we are extremely fortunate to have with us Dr. Ravi Kumar, who is the Chief Technology Officer of Atom Ionics Private Limited, Singapore, to give the fourth talk of the series. I would like to invite Dr. Saji KJ, Assistant Professor, International School of Photonics QSAT, to introduce the speaker.
Okay, so good afternoon. I'm extremely glad to introduce to you Dr. Ravi Kumar, who is the co-founder and CTO of Atom Ionics Private Limited, which is a Singapore-based research and product development company focusing on building quantum sensors for navigation and resource exploration. Atom Ionics deals with atom interferometry-based next-generation sensors to provide the most accurate and precise sensing for faster converging control loops in human and machine systems. I'm very proud to say that Dr. Ravi Kumar is an alumnus of our department who completed his MSc in Photonics in 2011. Dr. Ravi Kumar completed his PhD from Okinawa Institute of Science and Technology, Japan, by gaining expertise in the field of cold atoms and optical nanofibers. He was also a PhD student in atomic physics at the Tyndall National Institute, Ireland, and a research fellow in cavity quantum electrodynamics and quantum memory at the Center for Quantum Technologies, Singapore. Today, Dr. Ravi Kumar will be talking on cold atom interferometry and its applications. With great pleasure, I welcome Dr. Ravi Kumar for his talk.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saji, for the kind introduction. And it's really a great pleasure to be talking on this platform, which is Silver Jubilee for the center itself, which we have always been attached to right from the very beginning when we were doing our master's courses. So it's really a great pleasure to connect again and on this platform. And thank you very much for providing this opportunity to talk about what we have been doing at Atom Ionics. So as you mentioned about like cold atom technologies, so this is again, the talk is based on cold atom technology itself and majorly focusing on the quantum sensing side of the quantum technology. So that's what actually I will be talking about today. So let me share my screen. Hope this is visible to everyone. So as mentioned about me that I am running here a quantum technology company which is called Atom Ionics. So we majorly focus on quantum technology on the quantum sensing side. So it's a kind of building a next generation of sensing technology which is based on atomic physics and cold atom technology basically. So here is the content of the talk. First of all, I would like to introduce some of the basic principles of this technology, which is wave particle duality, something which has been like talked about quite a lot. And now we are seeing these kind of things coming into application side. So then after that, I will talk about like laser cooling of atoms and trapping of the atoms, which actually allows us to build matter wave interferometers. Based on that, like we build up some more theory on how to do measurements on with atom interferometry. Gravimetry and the rotation sensing is something which is a kind of a basic tool which allows us to do a lot of different kind of sensing for various applications. So then I will go into different applications that we could actually enable utilizing this technology, which is not just only in fundamental physics. However, it's also on the various use cases that actually can be utilized in the field applications. And in fact, that is actually the major thing that we as a company at Atom Ionics actually try to do many different kind of sensings, which is majorly based on gravitational acceleration and the rotation measurements and enable various different things that we will look forward to in the coming slides. So let me get started with this. So as we all know that wave particle duality principle was actually proposed by Louis de Broglie in 1929. Hence, this is something which is very, very well known in terms of its physics and its understanding and so on. However, in the application side, this is something now being very extensively utilized, and this is at the very forefront of the precision measurement technology that we are using today in this generation. So as it was mentioned by de Broglie that all the matter can have also wave properties. So what he suggested is that you cannot actually separate how matter and wave are. So what he said that all the things that we even consider as matter, they have some wave properties attached to it. And that is what was really very fascinating. And that actually was one of the very basic foundation where the quantum technology was actually built upon. So he gave a formula for de Broglie wavelength. So how he defined is that all the things that has its matter itself, but however with their momentum, you can have a wavelength attached to it. So that's what is shown here as a formula. So lambda dB is h over p. So it's a Planck constant divided by the momentum of those particles. So that gives the wavelength of that particle itself. So this is how like it's so much fascinating in terms where like now the classical physics is no more understood in the very same way once we have arrived to this stage where we are not like separating things based on their particle and wave characteristics. So however, also it's not just a kind of theory, but it's also something which has been like very well demonstrated in laboratories. So what we are looking at here is like there is a setup which actually allows to do matter wave interferometry. So first of all, even in 1956 itself, electrons were demonstrated to produce interference patterns. However, we were seeing till then is that electrons were considered as a particle, but at that point of time, now experimental demonstrations actually came in again. So it took like from 29 to 56, but still that was a very good step forward in the experimental physics. Then later on, it was demonstrated with neutrons in 1974, then with atoms, and now these days, we have reached up to the extent where we could actually see wave nature of massive particles. So here what you could see on the right-hand side is a molecule which has like 108 atoms, and that is what actually, it's a 2000 AMU kind of size, which can be detectable as well. So now, this is something what actually interference patterns produce. So this is kind of very similar to double slit experiment, but instead of photons, what is being utilized here is electrons. And what we can see here is the very similar kind of interference patterns appear. So this demonstration actually was one of the bedrocks where the quantum technology was built upon. And in fact, everything that we are going to talk about today. So however, like as we know that all the matter itself has wave property attached to it, but we do not see this kind of interference pattern all the time, right? I mean, we as a human being also should have like some de Broglie wavelengths attached to us, and waves by their nature that they can pass through each other. So, which doesn't happen with like massive particle, which doesn't happen with anything around us. So that means like there are something inherent into it that we are able to observe experimentally some of the things, but not all. Or in fact, like why it took even to demonstrate for molecules such a long time, because there are some prerequisites. These de Broglie wavelengths that we talk about, if P is very high, so if mass is very high, in that case, the de Broglie wavelength is very, very small, and it is hard to give you any kind of interference and very much access to the wave nature. So that is how like the first thing that we actually try to do with atoms is to cool them down. So what happens there is that once we cool them down, their velocity decreases. As we can see on this equation, that V square is directly proportional to T. So as we keep on cooling them down, that means actually reducing their velocity, then the wave nature actually becomes much more prominent. So here is some of the examples about what kind of things I'm talking about in numbers. So at room temperature at 300 Kelvin, so velocity of the particles which is like roaming around are somewhere around 200, 250 meter per second kind of range. But if we cool down a bit further, let's say get an example of liquid nitrogen, that is 150 meter per second. Helium at 4 Kelvin becomes 90 meter per second. And then at rubidium, it is 150 microkelvin, for example, is 20 centimeter per second. So that means like from what we have gained is from 240 meters to 20 centimeter per second by laser cooling of atoms. So what this allows us to have like a very, very high coherence time. So that means we are able to make observations on them for longer. Also, it has like inherent broadening because of the velocity distribution of the atoms. So if there is a sample which is like cooled down to microkelvin temperatures, then those broadenings also are not so much, which allows us to do much more better image spectroscopy with those atoms. So how do we actually cool them down? So for that, we utilize the principle for laser cooling, which is magneto-optical trapping. So the very first step over here, what I'm showing is, let's consider an atom which is in a red blob over here. That let's say that is an atom which is moving towards the right side, and then there is incoming photon which is coming from towards left. So in that case, what happens is that this atom will actually absorb that photon if it is near resonant light. So in that case, it will absorb that photon and also its momentum. So it goes to a different energy level, but at the same time, it also gains the momentum that photon had. So after that, what will happen to this atom? If it is going towards the right, then it will just slow down because of that momentum kick, which appeared from the right to left, as you can see in this picture. But once it has received that photon, next what it will do, it will de-excite itself, and then it will emit that photon in any random direction. So, and if we keep on repeating this process very often, that we are putting photons from one direction and emission is happening in all 360-degree radians, then in that case, what happens is that average momentum for the photons that is being emitted by the atoms actually average out to 0. However, for the incoming photons, there has always been a momentum kick. So then there is a net momentum kick, which is in the direction of the photons, basically. So whatever the atoms received, that is in one direction. What it actually emitted and got a reverse momentum kick, that is like isotropic in all the directions. So that averages out to 0. So this gives us a net momentum kick to atoms. Now we can do the very same thing with the light beam from both the sides. So now in that case, what will happen is that even if the atom is going towards the left or towards the right, it will get a momentum kick and then it will get cooled down. And we will go into a bit more detail about like trapping as well. But this is like very basically that's what is happening in laser cooling of atoms. And the photons that we prepared over here, we call them a cooling beam. So those photons are coming from the cooling beam, which are like very specific transition that we have to address. And these are usually the cyclic transitions, so that this phenomena can happen many times, 1 million times per second kind of rate. However, sometimes the atoms actually do not fall back to the same transition, but might lead to a different transition as well. So for that, there is another beam which actually brings them back into the cycle. So then this is a kind of repetitive process which is happening onto the atom, and its velocity is being reduced. Now we can imagine this picture in 3 dimensions. So in this case, what will happen is that there are optical beams from all the 6 directions. So in that case, the atoms will start getting the velocity components in all the 3 dimensions will start being reduced. Now to create a spatial gradient again, because not just cooling, but we also need to trap them at one place to use them for a specific purpose, then there has to be something which is spatially varying. So this is where actually magnetic field comes in, and then we have to prepare optical beam in a particular circular polarization. And then this circular polarization, what you see here, sigma plus and sigma minus light, they actually excite very particular magnetic transition itself. Like sigma minus will reduce m value by 1, and sigma plus will increase m value by 1. And then this spatial gradient has been created in the space. So that allows to actually trap them as well. So let's say here from the 0 point, what will happen if we have prepared the beam very specifically with their polarization settings, with their intensity, then from that zero place, even if the atom goes towards the left, it gets another momentum kick. If it goes towards the right, then again it gets momentum kick towards the center. So then it's getting trapped over there. So after all of this process, what happened is that we are able to cool atoms down in a trap. I will also show you later on how the experimental setup looks like. But now from here, once we have a sample of cold atoms, at that point, we are able to access the matter wave properties. So once the atoms are cooled down, what we could say then is that now they are behaving as an atomic matter wave, because from that formula, that de Broglie wavelength equation, that we know that once we have reduced the momentum, then the wavelength become higher, and in that case, it's much more accessible and it's possible to make interference and so on. So that was the reason that we first of all wanted to cool them down. And once we have cooled them down, then we can do various different measurements based on atom interferometry. So all of these phenomena actually happen inside a vacuum chamber. So this is a diagram that shows you that we have atoms trapped at the center of a vacuum chamber, and then we can prepare interference pattern by shooting different kind of laser beams onto them. So this is something again analogous to something what's happening in optical interferometry. So what happens there, as we know that, like, let's see the left diagram over here. This is for the atomic matter wave, but it's a very much analogous to optical wave. So it happens that first of all, we receive a light beam, we split them into two paths, and then again with some reflector like mirror in case of optical beams, we recombine them. And at the place where they recombine, the interference happens. And then from there, we can read interference patterns and the phase shift that occurs because of the two different paths that the beams has taken. And that phase difference actually tell us a lot about the physical quantities that we are trying to measure in that setup. So here, the same thing actually happens with optical beam. So the role of the role of matter and light has been reversed in this case. So earlier in optical interference, what we were doing is that we had an optical beam which is propagating in one direction, and then we had to split them with matters which are like, let's say, beam splitters, cubes, and then we use mirrors to reflect them back and then recombine them at another beam splitter. So here, what is happening is we are using light waves to actually split the matter wave and recombine matter wave. So that is how the role for matter and light is reversed in this way of doing atom interferometry. And here we use like two different optical beams, which we call Raman beams, to prepare those kind of states which allow you to actually separate the atoms into two paths and then recombine them. So, and something similar also can be prepared with to measure Saginac effect. Here what happens is that we, instead of like, we combine them again in the very similar fashion, which is for the optical interferometer. But now, as we know from the Saginac effect, that we can rotate, and that rotation will produce phase shift. So even if we do the same thing with matter waves, so let's consider here picture B. So the incoming path could be a matter wave, and now it splits into two different paths, and then they recombine, and then at that point, whatever the rotation that the whole system was happening, it is governed by the equation which is given on the right hand corner. So this will again allow us to read the interference fringes from the matter waves. But now here a bit of caution that not necessarily we have to read spatial fringes in the matter wave case as well, but in this kind of configuration, what we actually measure is the population of the atoms in particular state. But I think I wouldn't really go into much detail because of lack of time. But then there are like different techniques which actually allows us to do different measurements. So in the beginning, as we were seeing here, is a measurement of gravity. So what's happening here is that we have a cloud which is like we let them fall down, and at midway, we again, in the beginning, we allowed them to fall down, and then we sent one pulse which splitted the atoms into two different hyperfine states. And those two hyperfine states are also different momentum states, but now they are falling down, and instead of one, we have like two clouds. And then we send another Raman beam, which is pi pulse now, which actually reverses the momentum state and the energy state. And at that point, like what was going faster will start becoming slower, and what was going slower will start becoming faster, and then they will merge at one place. So this is something which is happening along the gravity direction. So it's just like a ball which is falling down, and there are like optical beam being sent onto them from in the same direction from the top and bottom. That effect can also be, yeah, this effect can also be characterized as a point source interferometer, which can allow you to separate between like acceleration and rotation component, because whatever is happening over here, it is subjected to both acceleration and rotation at the same time. As you can see in the left hand side corner, that there are two equations which are giving phase shift, but point source interferometry can actually allow to separate them as well. Now this is an experimental setup, and here what you could see is there is a vacuum chamber and there is an ion pump which always creates a vacuum which is 10 to the power minus 10 millibar kind of range. And with that technique that we just discussed about magneto-optical trapping, we can actually generate a cloud of cold atoms and then can do different measurements over here. So in this setup, what I was talking about, like different optical beams, they're just going from the bottom and then being reflected off from the top to actually prepare Raman beam pairs, which are responsible for splitting the atom cloud into two momentum and energy states and then recombining them. Now let's go towards the application side of it. So in the application, again, like it's a very enriched application aspect of this technology as well. So first of all, what we could see is that ultra precise inertial navigation, because as we are able to measure acceleration and rotation very precisely, we could create inertial measurement system. Other than that, if we are able to measure gravity very precisely, then it could be utilized for oil and gas detection or mineral exploration, these kind of things. For civil engineering applications, we can use one of these devices as a gravimeter and do survey, and with that survey we can say what is underneath the ground. So if there is a void, there is tunnel, then there is a different gravity signature over there that we could actually get access to. It can allow us to get gravity-aided navigation and positioning system in the places where GPS access is not available, or in the places where we do not want to rely on GPS as well. So we'll look at some of those applications. It can actually allow to travel as well for interplanetary distances. Also for many different applications like heavy mass detections, which could be utilized for national security or defense applications and so on. So briefly, I'll go through them as well in this slide. So next, this actually tells us about what gravity can enable. So as we know that, gravity, if you can measure up to 9.801807 or something, then it can give us mountains and ocean trenches. So it could give us information about mass, mountains and ocean trenches. Now, if we can measure up to 4th decimal digit, then internal mass distribution. So whatever happening inside Earth, like lava movement or different kind of mass movement, ocean loadings and so on, can also be detected if we are able to detect up to like 6th decimal digit. Nearby objects can be detected with a gravimeter of this kind of sensitivity. So this can enable various different applications just by gravimetry itself. Now, other than that, as I mentioned about like pinpointing minerals and hydrocarbon reserves, that is very well possible using quantum gravimeters with this kind of sensitivity that we are talking about. Prediction of earthquakes and volcanic eruptions. So as we know that there are like some precursor signatures of gravimetry changes, which happens in this kind of events as well. So once there is a burst of volcano, then there is a magma movement that's happening, and that magma movement can very well be detected by their gravity signatures. Underground structure detection. So there are like a lot of sites where people start doing constructions or making modifications. However, there are a lot of disasters happen if we do not know what's underneath. So a quantum gravimeter can allow us to detect what's underneath based on gravity signatures. Inertial navigation system, as I mentioned here, it requires to measure acceleration in 3 directions, rotation in 3 directions, and that can give us a navigation tool for which can be utilized everywhere. So underwater navigation, autonomous navigation, like in the space or so on. So for example, here, like underwater navigation in a GPS denied area is something which is very much demanding because there is no GPS available under the water. So that means somebody has to rely on inertial navigation system. Autonomous vehicle, at the moment, navigation is one of the bottlenecks that actually autonomous vehicles are facing. So once the navigation part is solved, then I think we would be able to see autonomous vehicles on the road much more quicker. Self-defense and safe, secure navigation system. So what happens over here is that GPS signal, if we are doing navigation based on GPS signal, then GPS signal can be very well jammed or spoofed very easily. So here is one of the examples where like college students could actually hijack $80 million yacht. So just by doing GPS spoofing. So in that sense, what happens there is that you can give some another signal which is mimicking GPS signal, but much stronger than the usual GPS signal, because GPS signal is anyway very weak. So in that case, the onboard GPS tracker doesn't actually recognize very well that whether it is coming from the GPS or somebody else is sending that signal. And then what it could mean is that somebody is going in a very different direction and doesn't even recognize that it's going in a very different direction. So that's a kind of very potential danger, and this can be done. This can be done very easily as well by college students, or GPS can even be jammed. So if somebody is just reliant on GPS, then there could be like few $100 devices which can jam GPS in the area, and now your direction lost. So these kind of problems are there. So that's why inertial navigation system based on cold atom technology could be very much useful. Other application of atom interferometry is like studying fundamental physics, for example, general relativity, measurement of Newtonian constant of gravity, and these kind of things, because it's a very, very sensitive tool. So one of the other aspects of gravimetry measurement is not just measuring gravity potential, but it's also possible to measure a full gravity gradient tensor. So what it is we can measure at a few different points, and we can prepare a full tensor, like how the second derivative of gravity potential is changing. So in that sense, now we can make a map of a particular area, and that can give us like complete insight into gravimetry, and which could even enable gravity-aided navigation and positioning. These kind of things have also been demonstrated, like some of the components for gravimetry detection for the full tensor has been like demonstrated earlier by some groups in the US. So yeah, basically what happens over here is that there are two atom clouds, and there is only one direction of the probe beams, which is actually going through both the clouds. And then what is being measured over here is the differential gravimetry. And we could do these things like in a very different fashion, like not necessarily they have to be like in the same direction of the vertical direction, but it could be also in horizontal direction. So the another component like TXZ is shown in the right side. So we could actually able to measure all of these things as well. Now, if we are able to measure full tensor gravity gradiometry, then this becomes much more interesting. Like first of all, when we were talking about gravimetry and detection of underground structures or mineral or oil and gas exploration and these kind of things, then mostly what we were referring to was a 2D pattern of gravity in that area. However, with full tensor gravity gradiometry, it's possible to even generate 3D gravitational map. So these things can actually allow us to get much more insight into this kind of phenomena, and we could very well locate that how big the pockets are and where they are located, at what depth, and so on. So that's a kind of another level of detection of underground structures as well, utilizing full tensor gravity gradiometry. Gravity-aided navigation and positioning system that I mentioned about. So what we could do is that we can prepare a gravity map and store in our devices. And now we can do map matching. So if we have a device which can measure the same parameters and it can correlate to what is exactly there in the map, and with that map matching, it's actually possible to actually navigate. So independent of your GPS signals and so on. So this is how like it can enable even navigation and positioning based on the gravity map matching. So yeah, now I'm nearly coming towards the end of the presentation. So this could be actually utilized in the various different ways. So at the moment, the way that we have been using GPS, it's possible that in the future, it might be possible to just use gravity signature and do like even point A to point B kind of transit in the local distances or even far, or like even beyond the Earth's landscape, you know, going to the space and so on. So these things can be like a kind of very universal system that's possible to be built using this technology. So now this is where I would like to conclude that atomic interferometry is actually one of the most sophisticated technologies and one of the most powerful tools that we have to access high precision measurements, and it can enable various different applications in terms of navigation, research, exploration, resource exploration, underground mapping, and so on. So with a very wide range of applicability of this kind of technology, and it could like very well enable many different new things that we have not been able to actually explore so far. So yeah, with that, like I would like to just acknowledge the team which is working on to build up this technology. So there are like different members who have expertise in many different sectors. So for atomic physics and mechanical engineering and electronics engineering and software engineering. So to build such kind of technology, we need to combine all of that. So this is the team which is actually working towards that direction to build quantum sensing to the field as early as possible. And with that, I would like to thank you all very much for the kind attention. And if you have any questions or any clarifications, please feel free to ask. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir. This is an excellent talk on atom interferometry. You could actually gain a very good basic knowledge related to what's happening in the field of atom interferometry and what are the different applications of it. Thank you so much. We have 4 to 5 questions which I'd like to read out. First one, can you please explain how quantum technology is used for navigation?
Yes, so now there are like two methods that I actually mentioned over here, that how we use quantum technology for navigation. And first method was inertial navigation system. So inertial navigation system basically is that we can measure acceleration and rotation very, very precisely. So at the moment, how we do is that we have mechanical accelerometers or electromechanical accelerometers and optical gyroscopes. You know, that is what is very widely used, but they are not very, very precise, or in fact, the bigger problem with them is like they have a very good drift. So let's say if we are trying to navigate underwater and we are reliant on inertial navigation system itself. So inertial navigation system, what it does is that it measures all the three axes of acceleration and all three axes of rotation, and then does path integration to find where you are at the moment. So let's say here we started with point A, and with path integration, it can keep telling you in which direction you went and what speed and so on, and then where you are. So this is what is the kind of current way of doing inertial navigation. But because of the drift of these sensors, like let's say, even if there is a submarine which is underwater and navigating for, let's say, a few hours, then it could be like few kilometers off from the real place. And now what they have to do is that they have to come to the surface and stick a pole outside to the water and then get some GPS signal, go down, and then like a purpose of submarine might not be very much fulfilled in that way, right? So that is where like it requires to build a very high precision. So what we are talking about here is like at least 2 to 3 orders of magnitude improvement in precision, and the drift is again 1,000 times better in the drift. So in that case, once we have a system which is drift free, because the sensor that I'm talking about has like atoms as a test mass. However, in the other cases, like let's say in different kind of accelerometers or even gravimeters and so on, there are like mechanical parts which is actually moving, or electromechanical things happening, you know, which can change by temperature, and there are many different things. So those kind of drifts are actually very much minimal in this way of doing navigation technology. So what basically quantum technology enables us here in terms of inertial navigation system is much better acceleration and rotation measurement, which allows us to be on the path for very long time without needing any external signal. So this is one way that quantum technology can improve navigation. And the second one that I mentioned about here was gravity aided navigation system. So not necessarily we just have to only rely on measurement of acceleration and rotation, but we could actually create a 3D map of all the areas. So it's possible to create a 3D map for the whole Earth even, in a sense that, I mean, there are some maps even available from NASA and different space agencies, but however, they are not like very, very precise measurements, but quantum technology can enable that as well, can build up much better maps. And also because it can have gravimeter, like let's say there is a submarine which already have a gravity map and it also has a full tensor gravity gradiometer, for example, then it can do the gravity measurement and correlate with the map, and then it can tell where I am. So that is another way of doing navigation based on quantum technology. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. We have another question. Which atom do you use for interferometry? Which is the heaviest atom in which interferometry has been demonstrated?
Yeah, so the heaviest are no more actually the atoms, but it has yeah, I mean, it has gone up to molecule itself, but if you're asking about the atoms, then it is actually on the periodic table, you can read up the very far left, and it is like rubidium, cesium, potassium, and these kind of things. So usually like rubidium and cesium are like very much used. And also that is because like there are like different reasons, like availability of the laser beams. These are heavy as well, and so on. So it's actually cesium, which is like mostly used, and rubidium as well is like very well used in this atom interferometry measurements. So like sodium, potassium, and rubidium, cesium, all of these things have been used. So, and majorly it's because like their energy level structure is very simple because of the one valence electron in their orbit. So that's what actually makes it very much simplified energy level diagram. So, and allows you to be very purely addressing one particular transition. So that's majorly the reason. Thanks.
Thank you, sir. We have another question. Is there a specific reason for the preference of Raman beams or Raman lasers for cold atom interferometry?
Sorry, can you repeat the question again? Is there any particular reason to use Raman beams for interferometry? Is that the question?
Yes, sir, exactly. Yes.
Yes. So the thing is like, I mean, it's possible to actually do interferometry by many different ways as well. So once we have cooled them down, then it's possible to in fact like send them through gratings, like as you can see on this slide, and which are like physical gratings, which actually separate them and then recombine them, very much similar to what light waves do. However, like with Raman beams is much more it's a much better approach in a sense that it can be used with optical beams. So it gives you, first of all, a very clean system. You don't even need any external object, but even for using like optical beam, there are different ways of doing it, like based on Bragg scattering or even the kind of Raman beam configuration that we are doing. So this actually gives a momentum kick of like 2 photons just within that process. And it's possible to do this just by the measurement of number of atoms in a particular state. So we don't necessarily have to have a spatial measurement done. So that is again like another advantage of just doing with optical beams, like Raman beams in this case, because what we do here when we talk about the fringes, then those fringes are basically nothing but changing internal state of the atoms from one to the other. So as you could look into this diagram, then here there is something G1 and G2. So atoms keep on transiting from G1 and G2 if we shine optical beams like with particular configuration, like if we are able to do like, let's say, Rabi transitions kind of thing. So what happens here is that at the end, first of all, we started with, let's say, all the atoms in G1 state, and then half of them we send to G2 state just by signing optical beams. And then after that, we reverse the state. So whatever went to G2, that came to G1, and whatever was in G1 went to G2. And the third beam actually, which is pi over 2 pulse at the very end over here, that actually brings that back to the previous state. So now it has already mixed into one state. And then just to know this phase, what you can see here, phi A, which is nothing but basically dependent on how many atoms we find into one particular state. So this detection technology also becomes very much simplified. Implementation becomes very simplified. And with the Raman beams, it's possible to actually get K effective also higher, because now K effective here is the addition of those beams. So what we see here, K1 minus K2, but K2 has a different direction. So it's actually magnitude of K1 plus magnitude of K2, that is what we are getting as a magnitude of K effective. So that's how it becomes a kind of very good tool for doing atom interferometry, based on the simplicity of implementation, based on the simplicity of the detection techniques, and also because you could utilize the same laser beams to do like these operations as well, which you are using for other purposes like cooling beam or the Ripon beam, but we have to tune it much more higher, but that's a matter of preparation of the Raman beam. But it's possible to utilize the same kind of laser system as well for doing all of these operations. So it simplifies a lot on the experimental setup and the detection, and is also it allows us to play with the internal states of atoms, like momentum state and the energy states are like both you could actually get access to by doing this Raman interferometry measurements. So yeah, it's mostly about the simplicity and like how we can actually do it more stably.
Thank you, sir. We have another question. What is the laser power requirement necessary for conducting cold atom interferometry studies?
Yes. So laser power requirement for, let's say, for doing everything, whatever required for atom interferometry, preparing all the different beams, which are cooling beam, Raman beam, Ripon beam, and also there are like blow away pulses, which you want to remove the atoms which are not in the state that you desire, and all of those things, and everything can be actually prepared with like 1 to 2 watt of optical power. So that's the kind of range that we are mainly talking about. So yeah, it's not like very much power demanding as well, in a sense. I mean, depends on what you think is high power, but like it's not very much high power. So it's a kind of moderately, reasonably low power itself, like 1 to 2 watt kind of range, and you could do the complete experiment with that laser system.
We have another one. We have heard of sensitive atom interferometers using Bose-Einstein condensates. Can you please comment on that?
Yeah, so there are like, in fact, atom interferometry is also utilized for many different things, right? Like as I mentioned that it's also utilized for various different applications. For example, studying general relativity or so on. So there are like experiments in which people actually have a very long drop tower. So here what I showed you, a vacuum chamber, which is like quite small, right? As you can see, this is the whole height of this system is something like 70, 80 centimeter or so. So that kind of magnitude. But however, like there are experiments which are done in a very long tower, which are like 10, 20 meter kind of long tower. And then people actually do the very similar experiments of like Raman beam interferometry. But the sensitivity actually, as you could see in the another formula, is dependent on the time of measurement as well, that how long can you actually measure that sample. So if somebody is looking to access to up to general relativity kind of range, which is like already a few orders of magnitude much more sensitive than all the applications that I just like, most of the applications that I just described. So in that case, people have to be very much colder as well. So that is where like now Bose-Einstein condensate state again could be required to have the velocity distribution very, very small. So very cold sample, so it doesn't expand very much, even if we are able to drop it for a very long length, for a drop length. So it dependent on the application, how cold actually somebody wants their sample. So yeah, it's actually specific on the applications, whether do you really need a Bose-Einstein condensate or you might not. But more or less all the principles that we talked about here actually follows in both the conditions.
Thank you, sir. I think there are no more questions and queries. But before winding up, sir, can you please tell us more about atom ionics and how it all evolved?
Yeah, yeah, thank you very much. So actually at Atom Ionics, first of all, like we started with like on looking into quantum sensing technology, because like as you know that we all are researchers again, like most of the people here are actually coming from atomic physics lab, except like some other people who have uh, electronics background or mechanical background and so on. So in that case, like the way Atom Ionics actually started is that once we started looking into what quantum technology can do, and then the thing is like, I mean, these kind of technologies have been utilized in the lab for quite some time. I mean, it's a few decades already that people have been using atom interferometry in the lab, doing measurement of gravity, acceleration, rotation, all of those things that we talk about. However, now what we realize is that this is the time where the technology is actually getting mature enough to be taken out from the lab environment. So that is where we started actually working on quantum sensing, so that we could build quantum sensors which can operate outside the lab environment and can really give us some access to the applications, So that is where actually Atom Ionics started, and it's like we were registered in 2018, mid 2018, and then first of all, the first thing as a company we had to do was actually fundraising so that we could actually get onto this venture, and which ended up roughly 2018 end or so, and then we started building on the team and then our laboratory and so on, and now we have a fully functional uh, atomic physics lab, which actually where we are able to do all of those things. The setup that I showed you actually is a previous version. Now we have a second one already built up. So the thing is like now that's where we all came together, and we all had a kind of vision is that build something which could be utilized by masses, So that kind of motivation that we had. So that's how like we started onto Atom Ionics and started building things. But again, it required expertise, not only just on atomic physics, but all the other domains as well. So even in the team here, you see the person who is electronics engineer over here, he has like 15, 20 years of experience building electronics for majorly for different applications. He was working at 3M and so on. There are different people who have done on mechanical engineering. So we have built like optical microscopes, which requires to be very reliable in terms of like their stability and so on. There are people who have been working on rocket engines for their mechanical structures and stability. So this way, like, I mean, the whole team came together to actually deliver something for quantum technology. So that's how, yeah, we are operating. And if you have anything specific to ask, then yeah, please feel free.
Sir, can you please tell us more about your clients, like to what all fields the applications extend to from Atom Ionics?
Yes. So first of all, like actually, what we talked about over here is like different things, right? One thing was gravimetry, and then it was inertial navigation, and then it was full tensor gravity gradiometer. So these are like three different things, but they also have different complexity. So gravimeter can be built with like just one axis atom interferometer. However, our inertial navigation system will require three axes of acceleration and three axes of rotation measurement. So it's six different measurements. So it's a bit more complex system. And then full tensor gravity gradiometer that we talk about, it will even require like multiple clouds at different places, especially separated different clouds, like 4 different clouds at, let's say, at separated with particular distance. So in that case, like the complexity keep on increasing. So first of all, what we are doing here is like we are building a gravimeter itself. So with that gravimeter, what we are trying to do is to test this device in the field so that we understand completely about what all things actually affect the interferometer and how it operates in the dynamic environment and so on. So first thing we are building is a gravimeter, and the first application that we are targeting is actually detection of underground structures and also like mineral exploration. So these are mainly the two ventures like which is like on the very immediate thing that we are doing. So because I mean a gravimeter can be used for these two purpose like in a very similar manner, So if we are looking for civil engineering or underground detection, then it is a smaller area survey, might be a few hundred square kilometers. But the same thing, if we are looking for mineral exploration or oil and gas exploration, then these are like a million square kilometer kind of range. So it's a very different order of magnitude. However, the device remains like very much same in that sense. But yeah, the how do we detect, how we process the signal and so on are like a different part. But then these are the two things that we are actually doing right now. And that is for what we have actually clients who are working on along with us to do this kind of initial testing. So yeah.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. We are extremely thankful to you for giving us such a detailed talk on atomic interferometry. We could actually get to know what is the basics of it to the application level. And since you're an alumni of our department, it actually gives us great inspiration to just come out and pursue career in this field of atom interferometry and such similar fields. And to all the questions also, you gave a very detailed explanation patiently. So thank you so much for all of that. And we would also love to listen to more of your talks in the coming years. So on behalf of all of us here at the International School of Photonics QSAT, we would like to extend a sincere gratitude for giving us such an excellent talk on atomic interferometry. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you very much. It has really been a great pleasure for me to actually talk about this, and I do understand is that I had to like go through a lot of slides in very brief, which might not have given a lot of explanation. But yeah, if anybody listening to this lecture, feel free to get in touch with me, and then we can even discuss even offline as well if there are like things that you would be interested to know about. And yeah, I'm very happy to keep connected and keep on engaging on a different events as well as far as it's possible. So thank you very much for everybody who is listening to this lecture, and thank you very much to the organizers as well for the invitation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. That's so great of you. Once again, thank you so much on behalf of all of us here at ISP. Thank you.
Yes. And all the very best to International School of Photonics for the Silver Jubilee celebration as well and going forward. So thank you very much.